Good morning, and War Eagle. On behalf of the Auburn University President and the Board of Trustees of Auburn University, I'd like to welcome you to a conversation with the Acting Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security, Chad Wolf. Today's event is brought to you by the McCrary Institute for the Cyber and Critical Infrastructure Security here at Auburn University. We have likely over the past few weeks used the term unprecedented more than any other time in our history. The COVID-19 pandemic has brought about many changes in our country and affected virtually every aspect of our daily lives. As an institution, we here at Auburn University have tried to respond quickly with our researchers and scientists directing their expertise towards fighting the COVID-19 pandemic and its impact on our health, our economy, and on our way of life. The Department of Homeland Security that you're going to hear from today plays a lead role in the nation's response. We are honored to have Secretary Wolf join us today to discuss the department's priorities and future direction in confronting the pandemic. Economic security and cybersecurity are two critical concerns raised by COVID-19, and the Secretary will address both of those. Secretary Wolf will begin today's conversation and then will be joined by Frank Cilluffo, who leads Auburn's McCrary Institute. With that, Secretary Wolf, on behalf of a grateful nation, I want to thank you for your willingness to serve, and we virtually welcome you to Auburn and look forward to having you on campus at some point in time in the future. And with that, sir, I will turn it over to you. War Eagle.
Well, thank you, General Burgess. I appreciate that introduction. And let me start off by thanking both Auburn University and the McCrary Institute for hosting the event today. Sometimes pulling the virtual events off here recently is quite an undertaking, so really appreciate everyone at Auburn and the Institute and the team for pulling this together. Let me also thank Frank. Frank has been a stalwart of Homeland Security and cybersecurity and really helping the department think through a lot of tough issues over the years. So very, very excited to be here today to talk about the department's response to COVID-19 and some other challenges that we are currently facing. And let me just, again, sort of finish here my introduction and thanking Alabama. The department has a number of resources in the state of Alabama, both from a FEMA standpoint, but also from a cybersecurity standpoint. And so we find great partnership not only with the private institutions in the state, but also with Governor Ivey and others. So Alabama's been a great partner to the Department of Homeland Security over the years, and I'm happy to be here this morning and talking about some critical issues. Let me jump over and talk specifically about the department's response a little bit. Regarding COVID-19, and there's a variety of ways that I can go about this as the department's doing a variety of different initiatives. I start off most discussions around COVID-19 focused on three priorities that I've had from the onset, and that's really to respond, to recover, and then to restore. So we're responding currently. The department, along with HHS, FEMA, is leading that coordinated response. We are responding to the pandemic. At the same time, we need to make sure that the department's able to recover and utilize its mission essential functions and fulfill those functions every day, not only during this crisis, but obviously when the crisis ends as well. And then, of course, restore is making sure that we are able to restore trade, travel, commerce to the American economy as we move out of the pandemic and as the country begins to open up in various phases. So that's my priority. That's been the priority to the senior leadership here at the department, and that's sort of the framework of which we are operating under. I also like to talk about mitigation. Mitigation works. We talk about it a lot in the coronavirus task force that meets daily. We talk about social distancing. We talk about cloth face coverings if you can't keep that social distancing. And so I'd like to re-emphasize that. It's actually critically important that we continue that social distancing, that social mitigation well beyond the end of this month, well beyond the end of next month. I think these measures and procedures are going to be with us for some time. Simple things, washing your hands, not touching your face, These things work. They're not high tech, but they are absolutely critical, and we've heard that repeatedly from the doctors on the task force. Let me talk to you a little bit about FEMA, and I could spend many hours talking to you about what FEMA's doing on the response. As you know, all 50 states, all 5 territories are under major disaster declarations. We're also working with the 38 individual tribes as well, all receiving assistance from FEMA regarding COVID-19. To date, FEMA has obligated about $5.8 billion in COVID-19 related efforts. They have also, again with HHS, looked at probably about another 51 billion in support of COVID-19. So a lot of hard work that's being done. We're also looking at over $100 million in grant funding through the CARES Act that the president signed in, the Congress passed, to help supplement and help local communities and jurisdictions as they respond to COVID-19. So there's a lot going on, and what I like to talk about is this really the unprecedented nature of the response that FEMA is going through. FEMA's very good at what they do. They usually do that on a very specific basis, very targeted basis. If they're responding to a hurricane or a tornado, then they usually do that in a handful of states at a time. And what we're seeing today is we're responding to all 50 states all at the same time, all looking for the same amount of equipment, the same type of resources and supplies. And so it's certainly a challenge, but it's one that FEMA is up for. I like to describe it a little bit to say that every state, again, at the same time is experiencing anywhere from a Category 5 hurricane to a Category 3 hurricane and somewhere in between. So it's up to FEMA to coordinate that response, and they're doing that in conjunction with about 26 other federal agencies, with HHS at the lead, using the medical resources and medical professionals that HHS, CDC, ASPR, and others provide to that fight, and they're doing that very well. We have a number of lines of effort that FEMA is pursuing, various task forces that they're looking at, anywhere from PPE, making sure we get PPE to the right place at the right time. We do that through a variety of different ways. I would say FEMA facilitates that through a variety of different ways, from new acquisitions to interagency donations to private donations and the like. So we're restocking the national stockpile and really pushing out PPE to a variety of different hotspots around the country. I think the one task force I'd like to focus on a little bit is the supply chain task force that's been set up. And that's been critical because it's looked at how do we emphasize or how do we energize the supply chain that existed out there to get PPE mainly from Asia into the US. So when we talk about that, we talk about 4 lines of effort. We talk about preservation of PPE. How do we preserve the equipment that we have here today? And FEMA, working with HHS, has put out a variety of different guidance on how hospitals, nursing homes, and others should preserve that PPE. And making sure that you're treating maybe that 70-cent pair of gloves like they're a $100 pair of gloves. How do we sanitize that? How do we reuse that if we can? We also talk about accelerating the PPE supply chain, and that's really the air bridge that's been talked about quite a lot at the task force briefings that you've probably seen on TV and elsewhere. And it's using that air bridge, and that's energizing the supply chain that takes place in Asia and getting those supplies here in the U.S. in a matter of hours instead of the 30 to 37 days that it would normally take on a maritime cargo ship. And so we have partnered with those medical companies that continuously supply the U.S. domestic market. And again, what we're trying to do is we're trying to energize those. So we're trying to speed those flights up, and the like. So we've had over 90 flights to date, millions and millions of supplies. I won't go through all the numbers, but whether we talk about N95s, we talk about surgical masks, we talk about gowns, face masks, overalls, or clothing of some sort, those are continuing to be surged into the U.S. And I think what FEMA and DoD has done there has been quite remarkable. We have looked into that supply chain. The federal government now has a view into that supply chain, which is a private supply chain, really understanding where all of that equipment is going down to the individual county level, which then gets distributed out to those critical healthcare facilities where they are public hospitals, private hospitals, or nursing homes. So all of that is going very well. Third line of effort when we talk about supply chain is making sure that we can build up our domestic capabilities here in the U.S. And so we see a number of different private, or I would say domestic companies here, retooling their supply chain, retooling their line of effort, their business, and producing a lot of PPE that they probably haven't produced before. And in some cases, we're using DPA authority to help facilitate that. But in most cases, they're doing this voluntarily, and we continue to see a lot of goodness out of that. And then the fourth line of effort, again, is just making sure that we supply and we surge those resources to the right place at the right time, into the right areas. And we're doing that. FEMA has a task force that's looking at this really on a 96-hour basis, making sure that we are surging those resources to hotspots, whether that's New York today and perhaps Chicago tomorrow, New Orleans, and a lot of other hotspots. What we're seeing is some of the larger metropolitan areas still are of concern, but now we're seeing some smaller areas that become hotspots because we have outbreaks in the agricultural industry or another industry or two. So we need to make sure that we're surging resources there as well. So really proud of what FEMA is doing along all efforts of the supply chain. We also are FEMA's working pretty closely with the Army Corps of Engineers, which has a number of folks deployed in support. They are building up hospital beds throughout a variety of different communities. So FEMA's handing out mission essential or mission assignments to the Army Corps of Engineers, who is, as you know, they helped build the Javits Center as well as a few others in major metropolitan areas, but doing a number of assessments across the country to really look at what else these individuals' communities need and don't need. A lot of other supply chains, a lot of other task forces are being worked every day, from ventilators across the board. So a lot to talk about there. Let me stop there on FEMA. A lot more I could talk about. Let me transition over a little bit to what CBP, as well as some of our other border security, border control equities are doing. We're under all travelers entering into the U.S. are still under a CDC level 3 travel warning, travel advisory. So that means any individual coming into the U.S. today is getting a medical check, is being asked to self-quarantine for 14 days. We're going to continue to keep those measures in place as we continue to phase in opening up the U.S. I think those are critically important. We have another 30 countries that's still under travel restrictions. That's China, Iran, and mainly Europe. We also have travel restrictions with Mexico and Canada over our land ports of entry regarding essential and non-essential travel, and those have been working very well. We've seen non-essential travel drop anywhere from 60 to 70% while we keep the legitimate trade, travel, and cargo operating. So we've been very successful at that, and hats go off, and my thanks goes to CBP for their efforts in that. We're also doing very strong measures at both the southwest border and the northern border, making sure that we don't introduce folks that are trying to come here illegally into our facilities, whether they're Border Patrol facilities or ICE facilities, knowing that those facilities are not not well kept to treat individuals regarding COVID-19. So a lot of what we're doing on border security controls. I'll shift to a third bucket, which is our Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. They're doing a lot of good work on our critical infrastructure workers guidance. This is a list of about 16 different sectors that they have pulled together along with private industry, providing that guidance to governors. So as governors make decisions on their pandemic plans and their shelter-in-place orders, that they have a guideline, they have guidance that say these industries, these workers are critical to the supply chain, are critical to the economy of the U.S. We need to make sure that they continue to go to work and have the access to do that. So we're on our, I think, version 3.0 that CISA has put in place, and it's working very well. We've seen about 34 different governors either reference or link directly to that guidance as they put their plans out in place. CISA is also looking at the cyber effects of COVID-19 and look at some very malicious activity that they see on a variety of different fronts. And they've partnered with the UK, putting out joint alerts for this malicious cyber activity, and we'll continue to look at that. We do see a little bit of an increase of that, but CISA is on it under the leadership of Director Krebs as well. So very happy about what they're doing there. And then I'll talk about it perhaps a little bit later about what CISA is doing with telework. As everyone is working remotely these days, making sure that the networks, the systems are able to continue to keep pace with the bandwidth that's needed, but also any, again, nefarious, malicious cyber activity that goes along with that teleworking. CISA is certainly looking at from that perspective as well. So there's a lot of what the department's doing. We've got a lot of other efforts that are going on from some research and development using the virus on the effects of sunlight on both surface as well as aerosol environments. We have our Immigrations and Customs Enforcement actually bringing home Americans from Central and South America on air flights. So there's a lot of what the department's doing sort of behind the scenes. I think a lot of what you hear about now is testing, which we're over 5 million tests that have been completed. And the focus needs to, again, remain on testing, remain on PPE, make sure we're getting the supplies out there. But a lot of what we do in the background here at the department is making sure that we continue to keep the supply chain open. We continue to keep those, not only the PPE flowing, but also the everyday goods and services that everyone in the U.S. uses. We're involved in keeping the agricultural industry open, making sure we have visas in place for those workers. So I can go on and on, a little rambling here a little bit, but a lot of it's to say that the department's doing a lot regarding COVID-19. And let me perhaps suspend there. I'll turn it back over to Frank, and we can get in and dive into a little bit more issues.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Secretary Wolf. That was a phenomenal overview of the vast mission space that the Department of Homeland Security is engaged in. I mean, the breadth and the depth is incredible. And to echo General Burgess's thoughts, thank you for leading the women and men who are working day in, day out, not only responding to COVID, but the Department of Homeland Security has to be open 24/7, regardless of what crisis we're facing right now. So thank you for that. And before I jump into a couple of specific questions, I want to remind our viewers, whether you're watching on YouTube or Facebook or Twitter, please, questions put in the comment section. We have someone tracking some of those, and we'll try to get to some of these questions as well. So, Secretary Wolf, I wanted to jump on one of the points you made. I mean, you talked about the supply chain issues, and I thought that the very efforts that you're taking are immense. I want to look to some of the economic security issues, and COVID did expose both the short-term and the long-term challenges in this particular space. And I'd be curious how DHS is realigning and adjusting to meet this challenge. If I'm not mistaken, you've recently stood up a new office, and I don't mean to ask a leading question because I'm helping on an effort with you on defining some of the mission space there. But can you talk a little bit about some of the short-term and also some of the long-term priorities around economic security? Because I think the department plays a critical role here, and I'd be curious what some of your thinking is here.
Yeah, thanks, Frank. I appreciate that. I've talked about this for the past several months, that economic security is really Homeland Security. And we do mean that. And the department's been involved in economic security for some time. I don't think we've been very articulate about how we talk about that, how we address that. We usually stick to maybe our traditional missions of counterterrorism, whether it's TSA, whether it's CISA and others, but really a lot of what we do is in fact economic security. So whether you're looking at CBP, or you're looking at trade, you're looking at imports, exports, and the work that they do there, you're looking at TSA, how we keep travelers moving in the air environment. Whether you look at Coast Guard, and 90% of all the consumer goods that we use in the country come in through ports and waterways, and making sure that the Coast Guard continues to keep that legitimate trade and travel flowing is absolutely critical. I think what we've seen here, really, highlighted by COVID-19, is really that the supply chain and how it's under an immense amount of pressure, and even the small little hiccup has really a trickle effect and a big effect, I would say, across the board. So we're taking a look at that. You mentioned we've created an office. I did shortly after assuming this post and this chair, created an Office of Economic Security, which is kind of the umbrella for the department, and trying to coordinate across the department all the different authorities that we have, the different levers that we have. You also mentioned, and thank you, Frank, for participating on the Homeland Security Advisory Committee. I tasked that committee, the subcommittee, to look at this economic security mission from a DHS perspective and provide some recommendations on how we better organize ourselves, look at the authorities. Do we need some new authorities? To really take a holistic look, and I appreciate the work that the subcommittee is doing on that, and really look forward to what I see there. Obviously, we've got a number of different unique authorities at the department. When we look at economic security, can come from a variety of different ways. One is from a foreign investment standpoint. And so the department certainly looks at not only the risk of foreign investment, but actually the foreign investment itself. So whether that's through Team Telecom or what we do on the CFIUS work at the department, very, very critical. Counterfeits, very, very critical to the American economy every day. So well before COVID kicked in full force, the department issued its very first counterfeit strategy to really talk about how we are going to address this issue holistically across the department. I would say COVID-19, again, as it has in a number of different ways, has highlighted the vulnerability of the issue of counterfeits, I should say. One thing I didn't talk about in the opening is the fraudulent activity that the department sees and what we're engaged in from CBP, from ICE, from Secret Service, and even CISA from a cyber perspective, Secret Service from a financial crimes perspective, looking at a variety of different COVID-related incidents that are popping up, from counterfeit test kits to, again, that malicious cyber activity to cyber scams across the board. We're seeing a variety of activity and addressing this pretty comprehensively with the law enforcement resources that we have. So, again, that ties back into the economic security portfolio as well. And then, again, as part of the renewed effort, we're standing up an economic security sort of economic security council of sorts, again, trying to pull all the resources of the department together. And I think over the long term, well beyond my tenure here, I think this is going to be an enduring effort of the department on articulating how the department and how security and homeland security is vitally tied into what occurs every day in keeping the U.S. economy running and protected. So appreciate the opportunity to address that.
Well, thank you, Secretary Wolf. And I should note here, this was a priority of yours when you were in the Undersecretary of Policy position. So you had the foresight to see this early on, and I'm glad the department is asserting its important role in this, both from a short term, but also some of the critical infrastructure considerations and the fact that some hostile countries may be trying to acquire some of these critical sectors. So thank you for that. I thought we'd jump now to next week, I think, kicks off hurricane season. And Alabama is no stranger to Mother Nature rearing her head, including Lee County, including General Burgess, who kicked us off. His home was hit by a tornado not too long ago, and they've been, luckily he was okay, but there have been tragic effects to others in the area. How do you envision, I mean, FEMA playing the primary role in COVID-19 response, which is massive in its scale, it's global, it knows no borders, but then how are the same agencies going to be tasked with dealing with both COVID-19 and hurricanes, which don't have a timetable? We don't have a vote in when they rear their head. So I'd be curious what your thinking is there. And from an operational standpoint, I mean, we have shelter in place and concepts where we want to protect people from COVID-19, but we may have to look to the opposite when we're dealing with hurricanes. So I'd be curious what some of your thinking is there. And a reminder again, the mission of the department is so critical and it's so broad that you've got to be able to walk gum and chew gum and walk at the same time. And that's a tough one in this particular case. But I'd be curious what your thinking is there.
Absolutely. So this is one issue I talked with Administrator Gaynor at FEMA early on, several months ago, as they stood up their COVID response. As you know, the NRCC, the National Response Coordination Center at FEMA, is stood up at a level 1 today regarding COVID-19. That is the primary center, and that's really how they organize most of their response to either, again, natural or man-made disasters. So I've been in discussions with Administrator Gaynor. He's got a good approach. What we're doing at the moment is we're actually establishing a mirrored NRCC for hurricanes, for tornadoes, and all the Midwest floods, California fires, and the like. So FEMA's going to have to, and they're in the process of doing both. They're going to continue to respond to COVID as that continues to be the priority, but we all recognize hurricane season is upon us, or will be very soon, and that all the other natural disasters are not going to stop. In that they're going to have to be responded to. So the short answer is we're building a mirrored NRCC site here in DC. We're taking a portion of the FEMA workforce. We are divorcing them from COVID-19. We are retraining them on specific hurricane, tornado activities. So what you're going to basically see is you're going to have two different workforces, one on COVID and one devoted to what their traditional missions are. So that's kind of the physical aspect of it. Virtually, though, we're doing, or I should say, FEMA's doing more and more of their activities virtually. So how can they do assessments using virtual capabilities, whether that's satellite imagery, whether that's drone technology, and everything in between? And they're doing more and more of that. I was down in Mississippi probably about 2 weeks ago after an outbreak of tornadoes there. And I think FEMA, along with the Red Cross, we're doing something very simple when we talk about COVID-19 challenges and bringing folks into shelter who have perhaps lost their house. Instead of putting them in shelters, we're putting them in hotels. And we know the hotel industry across the country is one of those industries that is suffering like others. So we don't see any issues with finding vacant hotel rooms at the moment. So that is certainly a good best practice that we'll continue to look at. If it's a larger hurricane event, there'll be some problems and some challenges that we'll have with that approach. But again, FEMA's taking a look at how they start doing a lot of what they would do instead of going door to door, looking at individual assessments, individual IA that they would do. How can they do that virtually? And they're starting to really put those procedures together. So like anything else, COVID is changing the nature of how the department operates, and specifically how FEMA looks to respond to, again, those man-made and natural disasters.
Awesome. Well, thank you. And thanks for the support to state and local. I'm reminded of an old Marine Corps adage, amateurs talk strategy like me, professionals talk logistics, and FEMA really is in the logistics business, but really critical to get there ahead of the curve. And it appears that's precisely what's going on now. So thank you for that. I'm going to ask one more question, and then I'm going to turn it over to maybe a question from the audience. And you know you can't escape without a cyber question or critical infrastructure. So, but due to sort of COVID-19, I mean, literally the entire country overnight went online. At the same time, our bad guys recognize that they have the potential to make a bad situation worse, whether it's in fraud. And I'd love to hear some of the work that maybe HSI and others have had some success stories in terms of tackling some of this. And there's also the potential, obviously, for nation-state actors. But I'd be curious what the department is doing. And I know CISA has been leaning forward on this. But I'd be curious how they're supporting their stakeholders, and then a thought or two maybe on what we define our most critical of our critical infrastructure. So CISA has defined sort of the 16 critical infrastructure sectors and the national critical functions. I'd be curious what you think the Section 9, how the most critical of our economic and national security and public safety entities are doing. So cyber question, and then I'm going to turn it over to a question from our audience.
So I think CISA, as you indicated, is obviously playing a very critical role in a couple of different, again, lines of effort. One is making sure that we're securing a number of critical industries when we look at COVID-19. So you talked about the traditional role that CISA does looking at critical infrastructure. They know the sectors, they know those communities, they interact with those communities. I think what COVID-19 has highlighted is maybe there are some other additional communities, some of these industries that have been on their radar, and then others that perhaps have not been on their radar that they have to secure. So CISA, very early on, partnering with HHS as well as others, are looking at those cyber vulnerabilities of these certain industries, not only the industries, but also HHS and others that are involved in the response to COVID. So I think what we're seeing here, and again, specific to COVID, is identifying some of these new industries that are critical to the economy and critical to our response. And so CISA is certainly doing that. I would say that's certainly sort of one line of effort. Two, I talked about a little bit is the imposing cost on these barriers. And so ICE is doing this, CBP is doing this, Secret Service is doing this, of course FBI and others part of the US government are also doing this. So we have active investigations, we have active operations in place today to make sure that those that are trying to take advantage of this situation are held accountable and are fully prosecuted. So very proud about the work that we're doing there. And of course, we talked about a little bit earlier is teleworking. What are we doing here? And I think that's an area that CISA has really put some thought process behind. You can go to the CISA website, cisa.gov/telework. Gives you a number of best practices, a number of things that companies can think about, look at, and really start to anticipate future use and future need. I think we all recognize that when we get back to some version of normal, it's going to look very different than what it did late last year. And so you're likely going to see a number of companies and probably even elements of the US government really rely on telework. And so what are the vulnerabilities there? What are the challenges? And the good folks at CISA who do this every day are thinking about that in real time, thinking about that today, and providing that guidance and working with the industry to really push out what they normally do on an everyday basis, which are best practices and things that they can think about. So again, very proud of what CISA is doing. And I think as we, again, come back and we start phasing open the country and the economy and how we do business every day is going to change. Not only things like this, but how we order goods, consumer goods, and how we interact with each other is going to take on a whole new approach. And I think CISA plays a very important role there as they both look at the cyber vulnerabilities, but also making sure, working with other elements of the U.S. government, that those networks can sustain that traffic.
Awesome. Mr. Secretary, we have a bunch of questions. I'm going to just pick two and run from there. So the first is from DJ Collier, who's at Maxwell Air Force Base, and he's asking what role the DHS, DOD, what role are they expecting, and how do you see that syncing up, and what expectations specifically around COVID-19 do you think should be expected there? So, I mean, the whole Homeland Defense, Homeland Security, mission assurance, and emergency preparedness, they all come together. So a question there maybe to start with.
Sure. DoD is a great partner to the Department of Homeland Security, even well before COVID-19, but certainly during this response as well. So they are lockstep with FEMA, providing a number of resources and support. I talked a little bit earlier about the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers providing support, getting mission assignments from FEMA. We have the National Guard, I think over 30,000 deployed in various states across the country, supporting governors as they respond to this. We have support from DoD on our southwest border, providing more surveillance capabilities there. We work very closely with NORTHCOM and General O'Shaughnessy at NORTHCOM, making sure that civil defense that they provide, the expertise that they provide, backs up and supplements what the department does. But I think DoD has been absolutely critical, anywhere from the comfort to the mercy, providing those medical beds in various communities across the country have been absolutely critical to the response of COVID-19 alongside FEMA, alongside HHS, and a number of other partners. And I don't see that curtailing anytime soon. Outside of COVID, as I mentioned, DoD is a great partner to what DHS do. We have to work very closely together as our missions do overlap, particularly when we talk about Homeland Security. and what Northcom does here for the defense of the homeland and how we secure the homeland. So we're great partners, and really appreciate Secretary Esper and everything that he's done for the department over the last several months.
Awesome. And I might just add a little footnote of my own here, given some of the work through the Cyber Solarium Commission. The lash up between NSA and CISA is critical to success, right. and we're seeing a lot of very positive momentum there. So through the newly created Cybersecurity Director at NSA, so kudos to the folks at DHS and at Fort Meade for making that happen. I'll ask one more question. There are a bunch, and I apologize in advance to folks who we weren't able to get to, but this is from Alexander Siechlag, who is asking specifically around where you see workforce needs and how academic institutions can best support and maybe adapt given some of the new crises, the Department of Homeland Security, whether through centers of excellence or just in general. I mean, at the end of the day, we're here to make sure we not only build the ninjas of tomorrow at Auburn University and the cyber side, but also that we bring the workforce that you guys need. So I'd be curious what your thoughts are there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I appreciate that question. Our academic partners, as well as our private sector partners, are absolutely critical in what we do here at the department every day. Homeland Security is not done just by the 240,000 men and women of DHS, but it's done in conjunction with our private sector partners. So I really appreciate that answer. I think the workforce needs of the department are large. I think we've talked over the last several years of how we get the cybersecurity expertise into CISA, retain them, but those aren't the only needs of the department, but those are certainly the emerging needs. We have workforce needs across the department. And as I talk about with a number of different audiences, you come to work at DHS because you believe in the mission. You believe in the mission of whether it's CBP, TSA, ICE, CISA, the Coast Guard. That's what draws you to the department. So I would encourage anyone out there that's driven to that mission to contact us. Those are the folks we're looking for. We can train who we need to train to our specific missions. It's better, particularly in the cyber area, if you have that background and you come to us well trained. But when we talk about the other law enforcement capabilities or the other analyst positions that we have at the department, first and foremost, what I'm looking for is individuals that believe in the mission, that want to be here, that perhaps are not looking to make. You're not going to look to make millions and millions of dollars working at the Department of Homeland Security, but what you're going to do is you're going to be a very valuable piece of protecting the homeland, and it's a very important mission. So we work with a number of centers of excellence around the country, from a variety of different universities on a variety of different disciplines, whether that's biotech, bioterrorism, whether that's more border security, that's technology standpoint or a cyber standpoint. The needs of the department are large, and that's why we need that private sector to really to partner with us. So continue to look forward. As far as the workforce needs of DHS, again, I talked a little bit about it. I think coming out of COVID-19, how we interrelate to one another is going to be different. I think there was a perception that the efficiency of the department would somehow drop off during the vast majority of folks teleworking, and we've actually seen the opposite of that. We've seen, just great efficiencies, utilization is higher, and people are working just as much at home as they are here in the office, and perhaps you can avoid those long commutes and you can do things remotely just as you do here. So I think it might be interesting to have folks think about that. How does that look? How does that work over the long term, and not just for 6 or 7 months as we get through this pandemic? But what does that mean for the larger mission for a department like Homeland Security, where we both have frontline operators who stand guard every day, but we also have a variety of support functions, analysts, and others that back them up doing the work. So a little bit of an open-ended response there, but I think the needs and that partnership with not only the academic industry, but our private sector partners will continue into the future.
Mr. Secretary, thank you, and thank you for bringing in the private sector. I had a bunch of questions on that as well that we couldn't get to, but let me just say thank you on behalf of Auburn University. Thank you on behalf of the country for leading the women and men who are doing the hard work day in, day out to keep this country safe. Stay safe. Stay strong. Thank you, and know that Auburn and others are ready to support the mission when asked. So,
Great.
thank you, sir, and again, thank you for taking the time to join us today.
Frank, let me just say thank you for bringing this together. It's these are, again, a little difficult to do and a little odd to do from time to time, but really appreciate the work that both Auburn and the Institute, as well as yourself, have the partnership with DHS has been great. Really looking forward to continuing the dialogue and both even COVID-19, but when we get out from under the pandemic and we can talk about some of our more traditional mission sets. Looking forward to continuing that conversation.
Secretary Wolf, thank you. That is a wrap.